Hello. So, another week of school is upon us, another week of virtual school. And to get us started for our reading, I have my singing bowl. I had a request from someone. So, as I give it three nice thwacks, as I like to say, close your eyes if you like, settle into a comfortable place, make sure that you're somewhere that you can really pay good attention to the story and where you can be your best learner. So I'll give you a second to get to where you need to be, and let's begin. And now for the story. Let's get right to it. We are on chapter 16, A Very Dirty Bird. And by the way, there are 20 chapters in this story. Up he went very quickly at first, then more slowly. Then in a little while, even more slowly than that. And finally, after many minutes of climbing up the endless stairway, one weary foot was barely able to follow the other. Milo suddenly realized that with all his effort, he was no closer to the top than when he began, and not a great deal further from the bottom. But he struggled on for a while longer, until at least, completely exhausted, he collapsed onto one of the steps. I should have known it, he mumbled, resting his tired legs and filling his lungs with air. This is just like the line that goes on forever, and I'll never get there. You wouldn't like it much anyways, someone replied gently. Infinity is a dreadfully poor place. They can never manage to make ends meet. Milo looked up. With his head still resting heavily in his hand, he was becoming quite accustomed to being addressed at the oddest times in the oddest places by the oddest people. And this time he was not at all disappointed. Standing next to him, on the step, was exactly one half of a small child who'd been divided neatly from top to bottom. Pardon me for staring, said Milo after he'd been staring for some time, but I've never seen half a child before. It's .58, to be precise, replied the child from the left side of his mouth, which happened to be the only side of his mouth. I beg your pardon, said Milo. It's .58, he repeated. It's a little bit more than a half. Have you always been that way, asked Milo impatiently, for he felt that that was a needlessly fine distinction. My goodness, no, the child assured him. A few years ago, I was just .42, and believe me, that was terribly inconvenient. What is the rest of your family like, said Milo, this time a bit more sympathetically. Oh, they're just the average family, he said thoughtfully. Mother, father, and 2.58 children. And, as I explained, I'm the .58. It must be rather odd, being only part of a person, Milo remarked. Not at all, said the child. Every average family has 2.58 children, so I always have someone to play with. Besides, each family has an average of 1.3 automobiles, and since I'm the only one who can drive 3/10 of a car, I get to use it all the time. But averages aren't real, objected Milo. They're just imaginary. That may be so, he agreed, but they're also very useful at times. For instance, if you didn't have any money at all, but you happened to be with 4 other people who had $10 apiece, then you'd each have an average of $8. Isn't that right? I guess so, Milo said weakly. Well, think of how much better off you'd be just because of averages, he explained convincingly. And think of the poor farmer when it doesn't rain all year. If there wasn't an average yearly rainfall of 37 inches in this part of the country, all his crops would wither and die. It all sounded terribly confusing to Milo, for he had always had trouble in school with just this subject. There are still other advantages, continued the child. For instance, if one rat were cornered by 9 cats, then on average each cat would be 10% rat, and the rat would be 90% cat. If you happen to be a rat, you can see how much nicer it would make things. But that can never be, said Milo, jumping to his feet. Don't be too sure, said the child patiently. For one of the nicest things about mathematics, or anything else you might care to learn, is that many of the things which can never be often are, you see, he went on. It's very much like you're trying to reach infinity. You know that it's there, but you just don't know where. But just because you can never reach it doesn't mean that it's not worth looking for. Wow, sounds a little bit like some Jewish studies connections possibly, about having faith for what you can't see. I hadn't thought of it that way, said Milo, starting down the stairs. I think I'll go back now. A wise decision, the child agreed. But try again someday. Perhaps you'll get much closer. And as Milo waved goodbye, he smiled warmly, which he usually did, on the average of 47 times a day. Everyone here knows so much more than I do, thought Milo as he leaped from step to step. I'll have to do a lot better if I'm going to rescue the princesses. And if you guys recall in the beginning of the book, remember he was so lazy he didn't want to do anything, so this is a big transition for Milo. In a few moments, he'd reached the bottom again and burst into the workshop where Talk and the Humbug were eagerly watching the math magician perform. Ah, back already? He cried, greeting him with a friendly wave. I hope you found what you were looking for. I'm afraid not, admitted Milo, and then he added in a very discouraged tone, everything in Digitopolis is much too difficult for me. The math magician nodded knowingly and stroked his chin several times. You'll find, he remarked gently, that the only thing you can do easily is be wrong, and that's hardly worth the effort. Milo tried very hard to understand all the things he'd been told and all the things he'd seen, and as he spoke, one curious thing still bothered him. Why is it, he said quietly, that quite often even the things which are correct just don't seem to be right? A look of deep melancholy crossed the math magician's face, and his eyes grew moist with sadness. Everything was silent, and it was several minutes before he was able to reply at all. How very true, he sobbed, supporting himself on the staff. It has been that way since rhyme and reason were banished. Quite so, began the humbug. I personally feel that. And all because of that stubborn wretch Azaz, roared the math magician, completely overwhelming the bug, for now his sadness had changed to fury, and he stalked about the room, adding up anger and multiplying wrath. It's all his fault. Perhaps if you discussed it with him, Milo started to say, but never had time to finish. He's much too unreasonable, interrupted the math magician again. Why, just last month I sent him a very friendly letter, which he never had the courtesy to answer. See for yourself. He handed Milo a copy of the letter, which read, But maybe he doesn't understand numbers, said Milo, who found it a little bit difficult to read himself. Nonsense, bellowed the math magician. Everyone understands numbers, no matter what language you speak. They always mean the same thing. A 7 is a 7 anywhere in the world. My goodness, thought Milo. Everybody's so terribly sensitive about the things they know best. With your permission, said Talk, changing the subject, we'd like to rescue Rhyme and Reason. Has Azaz agreed to it? The math magician inquired. Yes, sir, the dog assured him. Then I don't, he thundered again, for since they've been banished, we've never agreed on anything, and we never will. He emphasized his last remark with a dark and ominous look. Never? Asked Milo, with the slightest touch of disbelief in his voice. Never, he repeated, and if you can prove otherwise, you have my permission to go. Well, said Milo, who'd thought about this problem very carefully ever since leaving Dictionopolis, then with whatever Azaz agrees, you disagree. Correct, said the math magician with a tolerant smile. And with whatever Azaz disagrees, you agree. Also correct, yawned the math magician, nonchalantly cleaning his fingernails with the point of his staff. Then each of you agrees that he will disagree with whatever each of you agrees with, said Milo triumphantly. And if you both disagree with the same thing, then aren't you really in agreement? I've been tricked, cried the math magician helplessly, for no matter how he figured, it still came out just that way. Splendid effort, commented the humbug jovially. Exactly the way I would have done it myself. And now may we go? Added Talk. The math magician accepted his defeat with grace. nodded weakly, and then drew the three travelers to his side. "It's a long and dangerous journey," he began softly, and a furrow of concern creased his forehead. "Long before you find them, the demons will know you're there. Watch for them well," he emphasized, "for when they appear, it might be too late." The humbug shuddered down to his shoes, and Milo felt the tips of his fingers suddenly grow cold. "But there's one problem even more serious than that," he whispered ominously. "What is it?" gasped Milo, who was not sure he really wanted to know. "I'm afraid I can tell you only when you return. Come along," said the math magician, "and I'll show you the way." And simply by carrying the three, he transported them all to the very edge of Digidopolis. Behind them lay all the kingdoms of wisdom, and up ahead a narrow, rutted path led toward the mountains and darkness. "We'll never get the car up that," said Milo unhappily. "True enough," replied the math magician, "but you can be in ignorance quick enough without riding all the way, and if you're to be successful, it will have to be step by step." "But I would like to take my gifts," Milo insisted. "So you shall," announced the dodecahedron, who appeared from nowhere with his arms full. "Here are your sights, here are your sounds, and here," he said, handing Milo the last of them disdainfully, "are your words. And most important of all," added the math magician, "here is your own magic staff. Use it well, and there is nothing it cannot do for you." He placed in Milo's breast pocket a small, gleaming pencil, which, except for the size, was much like his own. Then, with a last word of encouragement, he and the dodecahedron, who was simultaneously sobbing, frowning, pining, and sighing from 4 of his saddest faces, made their farewells and watched as the 3 tiny figures disappeared into the forbidding mountains of ignorance. We will pick up midway through chapter 16 on their journey. So looking forward to the responses that you come up with. And Pippi and I wish you a great week. See you later.